Welcome to this next episode of YouTube, where we have a few behaviors that we don't see as often. We thought we'd feature them. One of them is tossing behavior, and we had fed a deer to Aidan and Denali last Saturday. And of course, as we always say, when we feed a deer, doesn't mean that that's the only day they eat. They cache and they eat multiple things later on. And here's what they do with the hide. So there's a little bit of head shaking behavior there from Denali that stimulates them into a little bit of a chase with Aidan, and a little bit of play behavior. This was actually filmed from inside the auditorium windows. And so the stimulus of the hide, again, is, can be social and can be play. He will also be feeding on it, but again, it kind of stimulates a little bit of that excitable behavior, as you can see here, picking it up, head shaking it, which is a predatory behavior, yet, again, tail wagging, so it's pretty social and certainly something to occupy their time. So we do feed, as we said, roadkill deer, beaver, things that are their natural diet, and that's one of the reasons why we feed such a large quantity, is so that there's multiple opportunities, multiple days for them to be able to engage in those activities. And he was just doing a plucking behavior there, pulling the hide off, and again, that's another ethogram term. So as we said, it's not just a activity or a toy, it is a food source as well. These wolves are eating bones. They're, having fairly large bone splinters, and this hide actually is non-digestible, meaning they'll eat it, but it doesn't break apart in their stomach. And so what it does is kind of wraps the bones, and when they defecate, those bones come out and are pretty well protected. So we also see some interesting social behavior from Aidan to the camera operator. This is a Playbow, and then he goes down into a Sphinx lay, and then he submits, a submissive roll over there. So Aidan's been in a pretty good mood, and again, he's been interacting with Denali in a lot of social settings, usually later in the day, 3 or 4 o'clock. The staff say that there's a lot of interactions. Denali's been a little bit kind of picking, a little bit pushing and testing a little bit. Aidan doesn't like that much, tends to snap at him a little bit, but for the most part, they're getting along quite well. A little light snow dusting, and we've still not had a significant snowfall here, but temperatures have been cold. We did have a 15 below night, and the wolves are doing well in the temperatures. As we said, we have beds, straw beds. Aidan and Denali have 2 dens with straw beds. As the snow kind of lets up, we'll put more straw on the top. Grizzer is doing extremely well. You can see here just another excitable moment when wolf care staff come in. Usually he comes back through the fence, but this time he stops to interact with and watch Shadow and Malik, and then goes into a howl. So let's listen to that. In retirement, Shadow and Malik were fed a deer torso that had a head on it, as well as some legs, and so they had plenty of food available between the two of them. Malik is shown here carrying the deer head and possessing it a little bit. That possession is not as intense as it was a few weeks ago when he actually kept Shadow out of the den. Here he's just kind of standing over it, keeping watch and seeing where Shadow is and trying to make sure that he maintains that possession, whereas if you recall the last clip, last YouTube, he lost a possession to Shadow. So this time he's got that head and he's guarding it a little bit. The other thing we wanted to address is some people had asked, how do we tell these two apart? And so when we look closely at Malik, the characteristics we use to tell Malik apart are the almond-shaped eyes, again, kind of more pointed than Shadow's. And if you look very closely in the middle of his face, he has what we call a cowlick, a raised layer of hair. It's not nearly as pronounced in the wintertime because he's got so much hair, but he does have that cowlick, and he has a narrower face. He has less scarring around his eyes. He was a lower-ranking wolf, so he didn't have a lot of facial confrontations that resulted in teeth marks to the face, so that is another indicator. Lighter in coloration. He does not have the kind of the darker patterns that Shadow does, and so that's another way that we can identify him and tell him apart. The other thing, Malik does a lot more than Shadow. He does a lot of face wipes, wiping up against vegetation, and since we had that abscess tooth earlier this spring, he's had no problems with that at all. So we thought we might see some scarring from that abscess, but that's healed up completely since we pulled that tooth. In contrast, Shadow has more roundish eyes. Again, that sometimes is the indicator we look at. He's got a much darker pattern on the top of his muzzle. So you can see that kind of darker coloration there on his muzzle. Not pronounced by any means. He's got a much broader skull, and so his overall head is going to be quite a bit larger than Malik's when they're standing next to each other. I would say Shadow is also showing the signs of being a dominant wolf. If you look at the black scarring that's underneath his eyes, that's fairly pronounced, and that'll be with him for life. Those are just scars of honor for being the pack leader and having to be the one that disciplines all the other lower ranking pack members. So that's something that helps identify Shadow from Malik. And as I said, Malik does the face wipe, and that's what that is there. He was just eating, and sometimes that's a grooming, cleaning behavior. Sometimes maybe it's just who knows why wolves do some of the things that they do, but Malik is more likely to be observed in that behavior. The other thing that we wanted to state was that we are seeing, again, continued dominance from Shadow, where he's doing the chin rest. And again, that's just following Malik around, putting downward pressure on the back of the neck, and also downward pressure on the mid back and low back is a sign of dominance. Malik does a little posturing, but does not give him direct eye contact or test him in any way. He just kind of accepts it and then moves on. All very slow and deliberate. No doubt there's a lot of posturing that goes on between these individuals, and then they go on their way. The other thing that we want to state is we've got some real ice conditions here. Even Oscar needs some cleats on his paws. The lack of snow has resulted in areas that had been melting in the sun just glazing over. There's no snow for traction, so it's a little bit slippery, and we're really watching that, especially for Grizzer, who runs and runs and runs, and kind of does a lot of chasing scenarios. But wolves have better claws. They do have longer toenails. They've got a wider pad. They've got a better grip, and so we'll end this clip with a view of Oscar doing a few other wolf behaviors. Even though he's a domesticated dog, he knows about a snowplow and a roll-on back. And what's interesting about this is that Denali is watching him the whole time, and just, again, good stimulus for all the wolves to be able to watch him, and he has just as much fun in the snow as they do. So that's it for Wolf Care. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next week.